So, last time I was in front of this camera, I made a topical video. Things have continued to happen since then. You might have heard that a man named George Floyd was murdered by police, making him another tally mark in the massive wall of black people who have found themselves at the mercy of a cop and not lived to tell the tale. Like the several other people that have been murdered by cops since then, including Breonna Taylor, Deion Johnson, Rayshard Brooks, and most recently, 7 lynchings the police registered as suicide. This resulted in protests. The cops responded to these protests that not all the apples in the bunch are bad, while suiting up in riot gear to shoot at, mace, tear gas, run over, and beat the shit out of peaceful protesters and members of the press.
One bad hamburger at McDonald's does not make McDonald's bad. What the fuck does that mean?
America desperately needs new writers. These metaphors are getting embarrassing. What the protesters are asking for is defunding the police, who get multiple billion-dollar budgets per city that could go instead to, like, schools, or literally anything else, or just outright abolishing the police, who don't really seem to do much good, and the small amount of good they do could be done better by a social worker or mental health practitioners that you could pay for, instead of giving the police tanks. And here's the thing. Everything going on made writing the Borderlands video. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. Who did that? I'm just a skeleton. A little hard because I felt like in the face of everything that was happening, I was using my platform to complain about a video game that just has bad writing. And it felt like a waste. Like, there's injustices in the world, and there are people taking to the streets to do something about it, and here I am talking about how Randy Pitchford is kind of a dick. But then again, as I've said before, I don't like speaking as an authority on black issues because I'm not black, and therefore lack the context required to do that. Plus, even aside from that, what the fuck do I know? I'm just a skeleton who watches movies all day. Shit, I didn't even go to film school, so you can take any of my shit for granted as much as you'd like. But that does give me something little that I can do. I can recommend you films by directors of colors about these problems and let them speak for themselves. I mean, watching these movies ain't gonna get as much done as going out into the streets, but I do believe that film has the power to at least start a conversation, and it can give you a different perspective or introduce you to new ideas or different ways at looking at old ones. And, of course, I'm gonna put a list of donations in the description. You know, it's probably gonna be the one you've seen a million times, but it'll be there. You're gonna want to start with the documentary The 13th. It's a must-watch. Ava DuVernay is a great director, and Netflix put this one up on YouTube for free, so, like, you don't even have an excuse. And if you didn't have an excuse before, and you have Netflix, you can watch a miniseries, When They See Us. There are the more recent ones I've talked a lot about, Sorry to Bother You, directed by Boots Riley, and Blindspotting, directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada. Last Black Man in San Francisco is also really good. It is the story about a black man directed by a white dude, which is kinda gauche to say the least, but it was co-written by the man it's about and stars the man it's about, so it definitely does put him front and center. Fruitvale Station, seminal film of Ryan Coogler, the guy who did Black Panther and Creed. Do the Right Thing, that incredible Spike Lee joint that was just recently released on Criterion. Really, a lot of Spike Lee's movies are great for this. Malcolm X, and his new one, The Five Bloods, are all well worth checking out. When this man is passionate, he makes some good shit. Of course, Jordan Peele with Get Out and Us, like, obviously. Widows and 12 Years a Slave by Steve McQueen. Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk by Barry Jenkins. Also, in the vein of Pride Month, Paris is Burning, which, again, not directed by a black director, is very focused on the lives of black people, specifically queer black people. And, of course, that's just a start. If you got any that I missed that you want to put in the comments, like, go right the fuck ahead. Learning about these kind of issues, like learning about film, is a process that you ain't ever really done with. But now, I get to talk about something I do feel comfortable speaking as an authority on. The works of Christopher Nolan. The whitest man ever made. So first, let's give some backstory on Christopher Nolan. And I'm gonna be quick because even though my target audience is people who don't know nothing about movies, you probably know something about Nolan. So around 2010 to 2015, Nolan was the hottest shit. He was the real big boy director who brought real vision to his films. Needless to say, we've had a lot more of that in the recent years, but at the time it was kind of a big deal. The 2000s were kind of missing a lot of that. Guillermo del Toro and Peter Jackson tried to be that, but studios mostly kept them from blowing up. Then came Nolan, who just kind of ate up all the fame. Okay, Wes Anderson was there too, but Nolan was the one who got huge. The movie that started his career was Memento in 2000, a really clever movie about a guy with short-term memory loss trying to figure out who killed his wife. There are two separate stories in this movie, one moves forward and the other one moves backwards. It's really great. Then, he found himself breaking into Hollywood with Batman Begins in 2005, which was a superhero movie made for adults. By which I mean tweens who want to be adults, but even so, it was a much more mature take on the genre than a lot of stuff had been at that era. But where he really blew up was in 2008 with The Dark Knight, the best movie about post 9/11 feelings the US had about terrorism, security, and surveillance. Batman did also happen to be in this movie. It was a huge hit and everyone loved it. It was the #2 rated movie on IMDb for like a long time because, you know, the IMDb does kind of blow when it comes to that kind of stuff, and really, I probably don't need to say any more because you already know all of this. I also have another video I want to make about The Dark Knight too, so, you know, we'll get there when we get there. So after that huge hit, where did he go from there? Well, you probably already know that too. Inception. Inception is a movie about dream heists. It's a group of people who create dreams and take targets into them so they can steal information from the target's subconscious. And they have been hired for the nigh impossible job of, instead of taking an idea, planting or incepting an idea into someone's head. And to do this, they gotta deal with a whole bunch of bullshit, including the main character's subconscious projection of his dead wife that's always fucking everything up. So, I recently rewatched Inception, and yeah, it's still a pretty damn good movie. One of the things that it does really well is something I complained about when I talked about, like, Rise of Skywalker on Letterboxd. The third Star Wars movie is constantly moving at a breakneck pace, never giving you any breathing room. I don't think there's a single scene that lasts more than 5 minutes. It moves from story beat to story beat, never letting anything land, and every time there's a conflict, it's solved in the next scene, and yeah, it's a huge fucking mess. Everybody knows this. Now, Inception does this too, but it does this really well. You see, Inception is constantly cutting around and jumping from scene to scene, but it's never jumping around to new story beats. Each beat lasts a while. For instance, the first half of this movie essentially exists to explain the last half of it. Even when lots of things are happening, you're never gonna feel lost, because the movie makes damn sure you get how everything works. Because of this, the fast-paced editing enhances the action without taking away from the story. This movie is constantly tense, the stakes are well established, the multiple layers of ticking clocks help put some tension under all of this, and also just shout out to how sexy this movie is, like, hot damn! And, unlike Rise of Skywalker, you won't be so overwhelmed with everything that the significance of a quick emotional scene falls to the wayside because of all of the bullshit, because of something really clever the movie does. Throughout the movie, there are a bunch of lines connected to character relationships and emotional moments. They are mimetically repeated every time something happens relating to that character relationship. Let me give you some examples.
Do you want to take a leap of faith? Or become an old man? Filled with regret?
Waiting to die alone?
No. I'll come back. And we'll be young men together again.
These are honestly really fucking great, and they allow the movie to move at such a breakneck pace while still giving you some emotional weight when important shit happens. Though I do still have some problems with the pacing. Not that it failed to do what it needed to, but that some parts could have been better. I felt like Maul and Cobb's relationship could have had more weight if the weighty emotional moments around them were given more room to breathe. Like, sometimes they'll show up in the middle of montages where other unrelated things are happening. Even in the last moments when Cobb is going through accepting his wife's death, it's cutting to action scenes to remind you of, you know, the other ticking clock that doesn't really matter at that level. And even outside of that relationship, this movie isn't shy about showing off that it's sexy, but it never lingers in the cologne for very long.
Like, the Mombassa scene, right? This is where I noticed this the most. I wanted the movie to build some atmosphere, put me in that casino bar, you know? But it cuts around so fast you never get a chance to breathe the movie in.
Basically, the one problem I can say I had with this movie is the emotional stuff had a clever way of keeping you in it, but I would have liked it if the movie didn't need that, you know? If they spent more time on the interaction between these people, dialogue about what they meant to each other. So, Interstellar, you know that thing I just said? That's what I was thinking after rewatching Inception. I rewatched Interstellar the next day, and it kinda made me eat my fucking words.
Interstellar is a movie that takes place after a great famine killed most of the population, and the people left alive, this caretaker generation, need to make do with what they got. One of the members of the caretaker generation is Coop, a family man who stumbles upon secret NASA because of possibly aliens, and needs to help them find the habitable planet for humans to live on in another arm of the galaxy, because Earth is so fucked up there's really no other option. But to do that, he would need to abandon his family. So, subtlety has never been really the Nolan's strong suits, and it also hasn't been deeper human emotions and philosophizing about those. When it comes to the shit that's harder to quantify, Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan's scripts kinda struggle. Really, the first bits on Earth are where it fucks the bed the most. The first place I noticed the problems of the script was after chasing the drone and taking it down. Murph says,
"It wasn't hurting anybody."
And then Coop replies with,
"This thing needs to learn how to adapt, Murph. Like the rest of us."
Yeah, sometimes characters in this movie just look off to the horizon and try to say something profound in an incredibly unnatural way, when it ain't helping nobody neither would've worked a lot better. And they didn't really need to go in on the concept of doing your part for the good of humanity that hard, because it was brought up in the last scene, and it's brought up in the following scene at the school. And 3 seconds ago, when you said you were gonna give it something socially responsible to do. Like, we get it! But like I said, in the next scene, the world building does kick in again, but this time in a more interesting and natural way. And all in all, I really like the concept of a caretaker generation that attempts to keep the planet kicking after the famine has already happened. It's really interesting, and then the movie completely loses me with
explaining how the Apollo missions were fake to bankrupt the Soviet Union. We need to teach our kids about this planet, not tales of leaving it.
You know, one of those useless machines they used to make was called an MRI.
Why would society decide that the moon landing was faked? Why would the United States government mandate that the school board say the moon landing was faked? Even as a propaganda move, wouldn't it be good to use that as a take care of the planet now for the spacemen of the future sort of thing? And even if they were trying to push people away from being dreamers towards more utilitarian pursuits, why did they get rid of all of the MRI machines, which have a very utilitarian use? This wasn't thought out too well. Now, you may be saying, don't you hate going in on plot holes? And you're right. Well, sorta. This isn't really a plot hole, because this not making sense does not affect the plot in any way. This entire thing does not affect the plot in any way, which is part of the problem, because it sort of betrays something about the screenwriters, and then proceeds to not do anything else at all. You know how it is, they gotta get that persecution complex where they're right and everyone else is wrong, by taking a fringe theory and applying it to all of society, and have the justification for that application be that people are just intrinsically dumb because society is a bunch of idiots who think science is dumb, like the sun in the end. God, I was embarrassing in 2014. But really, this is just a small problem that's kind of a symptom of the Nolan brothers just not thinking too deeply about some stuff. And what really hurts from this is all of the love is our greatest strength stuff that the movie hits you with. So, this is established because Brand is in love with one of the guys on one of the planets, and she wants to go to the planet to see him again. Coop says this is illogical, and then she replies with,
"We love people who have died. Where's the social utility in that? Maybe it means something more, something we can't yet understand. Maybe it's some evidence, some artifact of a higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
I mean, really through this logic, so is hate. Like, it's the same shit there. All emotions really can work through that lens. Like, mental trauma? Sure, that's a fourth dimensional concept. I mean, I won't say love conceptually isn't special, but maybe not in that way? Like, this is some stoner philosophy level shit. And it's being delivered here like it's the most profound thing that anyone has said. And yes, the movie does agree with Brandt here. This is the theme of the movie. And this theme is all wrapped up in the end. So, the end scene, Coop shoots himself into a black hole and ends up in a tesseract and can see his daughter as a child and begs her to get him to not go on the mission. It's a great scene that is ruined entirely when the robot Tars starts talking to Coop, and then Coop just starts info-dumping everything that's happening to the audience. It's the worst case of telling instead of showing I've ever seen, because it was doing fine for like 5 minutes, and then it just decides to verbally assault you with information you could visually see. So as Coop exposits, he states that next he needs to connect with Murph through different points in time to tell her the secret to saving humanity. He does this by fucking with the gravity in her childhood room from the Tesseract. Meanwhile, Murph is trying to look for the message, who is keeping her brother occupied by burning down his crops and kidnapping his family. So this doesn't sound like it has much to do with the love theme, huh? Well?
That's why I'm here. I'm gonna find a way to tell Murph, just like I found this moment.
How, Cooper?
The love, Tars, love. It's just like Brand said. My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable. It's the key.
What are we here to do?
I don't even know how to, like, respond to that one. I'm pretty sure it was just fucking word salad, for real. Tars doesn't respond to that either, he just moves on, like... Anyway, back on Earth, the brother walks in on Murph kidnapping his family, and she's like, "It's okay, though! Dad talked to me through this watch! You kidnapped my family. You burned my crop." So the deeper theme is this idea that love is an unquantifiable concept that goes against all logic, but can create a deep connection with two people across time and space, and is therefore a net good. And yeah, it sure is, but that isn't terribly profound. That's not really a new insight. That's like saying television gives you the ability to see people, not only in different places, but at past times. Like, you're not really adding anything to the conversation by saying that. You know, we're aware.
So, let's answer a question you've probably been asking this whole time I've been talking about Interstellar. Am I saying that critically acclaimed, beloved sci-fi epic Interstellar is a bad movie? No, I am not. I would go so far as to say it's a very good movie.
When they get off Earth especially, it is incredibly, strikingly beautiful. The atmosphere I was missing in Inception is right on the money here. Both the beauty and the cold oppressiveness of space are never in question out there. And, on the farm, you can almost smell the plumes of dust, and feel how the famine has impacted people's lives. And every time this movie gives its characters a goal, with stakes, the movie gets really, really good. The tension is always palpable. There is never a lack of that in the movie. You're on your seat through a good portion of it. Some of the emotional stuff does land really hard as well. Like I said before, that bit where Coop is trying to get Murph to convince him to stay, fucking incredible. It breaks through all of its flaws by being intensely technically impressive. Not just visually through like the CGI and shit, but also through the impeccable talent in crafting a film that Nolan has. Really, the whole love thing is the best signifier of this. Every time the movie tries to explain to you via the dialogue what it's trying to say, it's the dumbest fucking thing you've ever heard. But when it shows you what it's trying to say, when there isn't any dialogue, then it's great. It is a good movie with a bad script.
But you might be asking, how the fuck is that possible? The script is like the story of the movie, right? If the story's bad, the movie's bad, right? You see, I could see how you'd say that. But let's talk about Schreiber Theory and Auteur Theory. Ha! I tricked you into watching a video about Christopher Nolan, and now you're gonna learn film theory, bitch! Gotcha again! Let's start with Auteur Theory.
To do that, we need to go back to France in the early 1950s. The war had ended, the French people were happy, and shit was booming. The Nazis were out and French nationalism was in. So of course the French began making movies again, and everyone in the French film scene was pretty much on the same page.
But then came a magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma. This was written by a group of crazy French film men, including Francois Truffaut, who's most notable for directing The 400 Blows, Jean-Luc Godard, who's most notable for directing Breathless, and Eric Romer, who's most notable for directing Film Theory Towards Auteur Theory. Now, of course, film historians see them as revolutionary nowadays, and they were, but they were essentially a bunch of massive hipsters. They talked about how lowbrow movies like noir films and westerns were good, actually, and they talked about how all of the prestige films that went on to win awards fucking sucked. The latter, specifically, was shown off in an article written by Truffaut titled A Certain Tendency in French Cinema, where he criticized the 10% of films made by the French film industry a year that were made purely to sweep French film festivals, as being nothing but derivative book adaptations that killed the spirit of the novel and were written by screenwriters who didn't take the fucking medium seriously.
I cannot conceive of a valid adaptation that was not written by a filmmaker. Orange and Bost are basically men of letters, and my criticism of them here is that they look down on the cinema because they undervalue it.
This article also laid the groundwork for what would come to be called auteur theory, the idea that a director is the author of a film, the mind and vision behind it. The director, when allowed to go ham on this vision, can make something really great.
These notes aim to do no more than examine a certain type of cinema from the sole point of view of scripts and scriptwriters, but I believe it needs to be made perfectly clear that directors are and want to be responsible for the scripts and dialogues that they illustrate.
But mostly it talked about the 10% of movies being made to please festivals by French studios sucked fucking acts and were garbage adaptations of books and the screenwriters are fucking acts.
There are only 7 or 8 scriptwriters who work regularly for French cinema. Each of them only has one story to tell, and each of them can dream of nothing but becoming as successful as these two greats.
And also a majority of it is just French film titles that I made Dawson and Sane read against their will.
La Symphonique Pastorale.
Delanoë once made La Bosse and La Porte de l'Ombre.
Jean Anouilh wrote the dialogue of Léo Johan's Vous n'avez rien à déclarer.
Autant l'oralet plombier aimeront and lettres d'amour.
Jean Interdit.
Le Diable Accord.
When they adapted and wrote the dialogue of Deuce, parentheses, love story, directed by Autant Laura.
François Bloyer, Les Joues Innocuous, and Colette Le Blab. This whole line is in French. This isn't fair.
This was sort of a manifesto for the magazine. All these guys were looking to American directors, like Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles, who had complete control over their films and were able to do whatever the fuck they wanted with them, and Italian directors, like Vittorio De Sica and Federico Fellini, who made movies in a post-war poverty-stricken Italy with stolen cameras using factory workers as actors, so they didn't need to answer to nobody. These directors would be considered auteurs, writer-directors who had a complete control of a film, who had a vision for a film and made it so. An auteur also has a style that you can pick out. There's something to their films that makes them their own, as opposed to the bland studio-driven films that were pervasive in France during that era. Oh my god, Truffaut fucking hated them. This idea and the magazine got pretty popular, and the theory was later popularized in America by a guy named Andrew Sarris, who was a big fan of Cahiers du Cinéma, and he was a big fan of Jerry Lewis. He talked about Jerry Lewis as being a great auteur, and brought a lot of Cahiers ideas to America. Those ideas then bled into the industry, creating the new Hollywood movement. Since then, when we talk about an auteur, we're talking less specifically about a writer-director, and more just like a director, even if they didn't write the script. Because, well, even if David Fincher didn't write every movie he's ever made, you can definitely tell that each of his movies is a David Fincher movie. This is the most prominent way to look at who made a film, if you catch my drift. But in 2006, a new theory came along in the form of a long article in book form, written by David Kippen. It was called Schreiber Theory. So why was it called that?
Auteurism represented a masterstroke of nomenclature. A generation of film geeks could now impress girls and themselves by dropping a little French into the conversation. But if not French, what? Yiddish, that's what. What language could better christen a script-based theory of film criticism than the mother tongue of many of America's first screenwriters? It naturally follows that the right name for this new heresy could only be the Schreiber Theory.
So, this theory essentially postulates that the author of the film is the screenwriter rather than the director. That directors just shoot the script, while screenwriters are the people who come up with the story and dialogue and therefore the entire movie. They're the most important people in the process, and that the current problems with Hollywood are not due to a lack of auteurs, but because screenwriters are valued so little that a shit ton of hack work is constantly being spit out because studios don't care about screenplays. It also attacks auteur theory on the basis that it essentially excludes the hard work of every other person who works on a film. Films are giant group projects, especially big studio films, and only giving credit to the director devaluates the rest of the entire set, which, you know, is a big problem with auteur theory. It also postulates that we had a big boom of auteurs, and as they've aged, they've all kind of gotten really bad. Like George Lucas and the prequels, for example, or anything Francis Ford Coppola made that wasn't wine. And, you know, Ridley Scott's general downhill slope. He also postulates that the reasons given for giving auteurs that level of prestige can all be applied to screenwriters in the same way. Or that the auteurs just stole screenwriters' valor. And there are a ton of other criticisms you can give to auteur theory, like it devalues the singular movie and just sort of makes it part of a body of work, and in its focus on the singular voice, it has given rise to your Tommy Wiseaus, your Neil Breens, and more recently, your Glenn Danzigs. But I think there are a little bit more criticisms that can be given to Schreiber theory. I mean, outside of how weirdly America is the greatest the book is, well, the first thing it does is say this about auteur theory.
Imagine a library of novels alphabetized by editor. Some lunatic librarian has willfully ignored all the authors' names. The names of the people who actually wrote the books have become all but unreadable. We'll substitute screenwriters for novelists and directors for book editors, and this is exactly the way we've been encouraged to think about movies since the advent of the auteur theory.
Directors do more than just plop down actors and props and say go and maybe change the script up a little bit. Well, okay, yeah, some do, but those ones aren't very good, are they? This sort of implies that a film is its script, but made visually, which it kinda isn't. It essentially forgets about directors like David Lynch or Alejandro Jodorowsky that make movies that don't really need a script. They make visual movies that are more about the tone and feel rather than the words being said, where a lot of times the words being said don't matter. It also ignores, like, documentary filmmaking as a whole. Like, I don't think Louis Theroux or Ken Burns are secretly stealing their scriptwriter's valor. Also, it criticizes auteur theory for being focused on one singular role when it asks us to do the exact same thing, but just with screenwriters. Oh, and also this.
The smartest people in Hollywood generally agree that the auteur theory is arrogant hogwash. Unfortunately, the smartest people in Hollywood tend to be the screenwriters, who have even less power than esteem.
Nah, actually the smartest people in Hollywood are skeletons who aren't in Hollywood at all and just make movie reviews on YouTube. Like, fuck off with this shit. Absolute jackassery. Even if it is ironic. Ironic shitposting is still shitposting. But the biggest problem with this theory isn't something I omitted, but rather something I kinda glazed over. It was written in 2006. Think back to the movies that were made in the first half of the 2000s that were really good. If you put yourself in that mindset, this theory gets a lot easier to see, it gets a lot easier to understand. Like I said earlier, there wasn't really much in the way of that big guy who makes good movies. They were all pretty studio-driven, and the studios were taking more and more power away from everyone save a few directors. But since the book was released, it has aged like a warm milk left outside on a Louisiana swamp in the summer. Wow, that was a flowery metaphor. Guess we're doing those, huh? So, the 2010s were kind of a return for auteurs. It kind of showed off the power of the director, and we got a lot of great ones showing off their vision. Ari Aster and Robert Eggers are two of them, Denis Villeneuve breaking into the American market, Yorgos Lanthimos, Lynn Ramsey, Greta Gerwig, the Safety Brothers, Nicholas Refn, most of the directors of color I mentioned in the beginning of the video, and hell, Panos Cosmatos and Jonathan Glazer made movies with as little dialogue as possible. Look, Truffaut, I can just list a shit ton of directors too! These guys were all either writing scripts or taking scripts and turning them into their movies. They've been creating catalogs of films that really show off their own talents as directors. They're men and women of vision. And that's not even talking about the old directors that are making new movies. One of David Kippen's arguments was that the auteur theory kinda sucks because as auteurs age, they get worse and show the world how good they're actually not. But then Terrence Malick showed up with like 3 lines of dialogue and made a groundbreaking film, and George Miller came out of the woodwork and made the aggregate best film of the decade without a fucking script. Yeah, Fury Road didn't have a script, just a shit ton of storyboards. One of the chief assumptions that Schreiber Theory puts forward is kind of emblematic in this quote.
Auteurism has conditioned us to concentrate on the themes and motives common to a director's filmography, all at the expense of those poor obscure hacks who only wrote the damn pictures.
This combined with saying directors are akin to music producers and literary editors heavily implies that it's stating that a film mostly comes from a script.
And this is where we circle back to Nolan. The Nolan brothers are bad screenwriters. They don't do good scripts. But Christopher Nolan is a good director who makes good movies. And the movies are good despite the script. Because a movie is so much more than just a script. There is a visual language to film. There is an atmosphere to fill. There are how the characters interact, what the actors do, and what you can do with a scene or even an entire film with no dialogue. And what Christopher Nolan can do is he can take some dumbass bullshit and make a really good movie around it. He's great at giving them tension. He can get you to root for its characters. He can put a little bit of emotion in there. He can pull some surprises, take the wool off your eyes, and make it impactful.
But a director isn't the only part of a movie either. Now, I am a bit of a proponent for auteur theory. I think it's helpful to look at a film with a little bit of that lens, but I don't think a screenwriter should be forgotten. One of the best things about the book, The Schreiber Theory, is at the end of the book, it essentially lists a bunch of screenwriters and what they've done to show off how important they can be and how a movie can be judged as a screenwriter's body of work. Because with some films, really a lot of films, you can look at it through that lens. Maybe not, you know, as a rule, but if you see a movie was written by Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orsi, you can, for instance, assume it's probably going to be a bad movie unless it's got a real good director behind it. I think David Kippen is wrong in that screenwriters are the author of the film and directors are the editors, but I think he's right in that they definitely deserve more credit that they do not fucking get, especially in big studio movies, where they are needed the most and get fucked over the most. And with that in mind, I think we can all agree. Producers are the real fucking scum of the earth, fucking leeches. They ain't do shit for nobody!
I heard they shut you down, sir, for refusing to drop bombs from the stratosphere on the starving people.
Well, when they realized that killing other people was not a long-term solution, then they needed us back.
Why would they say the moon landing was fake to spite NASA for not dropping bombs on people? Why would they shut down NASA for not dropping bombs on people? Why wouldn't they just fire the people who wouldn't drop the bombs and hire people who would drop bombs? Why wouldn't they just use the Air Force to drop, like, normal bombs on the people? This movie has the tendency to just sucker punch you with the dumbest fucking thing you've ever heard, and then just move on like nothing happened.